In this video, we'll be covering Units 6 and 7 of the AP European History course. These units deal with industrialization and its effects, as well as 19th century perspectives and political developments. We'll start by going through the topics that make up Unit 6.
The Industrial Age was started due to the invention of the steam engine by a fellow named Thomas Newcomen. The steam engine has provided a good deal of boons towards the economy of England in the era of the 1800s. For example, those who owned cotton mills could now expand production by building cotton mills in areas not necessarily touching the river due to the new source of power. Additionally, steam engines brought in a new age of transportation, and the spread of industry throughout Europe has brought great boons to the nation of England. For example, in this era, the capital city of London saw population increases from 740,000 all the way to 1.9 million in approximately 81 years. In addition, going back to the previous point mentioned, the lower classes were finally able to gain some mobility due to the invention and development of steamboats. This mostly led to immigration into England due to their massive amount of factories brought on by being the first to industrialize. Beyond that, the second wave of industrialization came to be after the development of steel. Well, more specifically, Sir Henry Bessemer of England pioneered the Bessemer process, which allowed for the mass production of steel. During this era, electricity was harnessed and used to better communications via the telegraph. Furthermore, the second wave of industrialization, what with its increased means of communication, further strengthened the value of capitalism by making it so that towns and villages far away from the large cities were coming more into contact with these large cities, which were centers of capitalism, thus resulting in space-time compression. Beyond that, the social effects of industrialization were quite varied. For example, industrialization led to the development of the middle class. This is because as the Industrial Revolution raged on, more and more capital was available both to the upper classes and to the lower classes. The lower classes were now able to hire doctors if they got sick or injured, and the higher classes, the upper classes, were able to purchase new products. For example, they were able to purchase more customized clothing. All in all, this led to the emergence of a middle class of, to put it this way, service people, doctors, seamstresses, accountants, secretaries, things of this nature. Furthermore, this led to the relative depowerification of the traditional upper classes. The aristocracy was now no longer as wealthy as, say, those who owned factories. This led to the decrease of traditional values upheld by the aristocrats, which in turn paved the way for further development.
Okay, the concept of Europe and European conservatism. The concept of Europe, which was established after the Napoleonic Wars, was a system of political and diplomatic cooperation among the major European powers of Austria, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and then later France. Its goal was to maintain the balance of power in Europe and prevent the spread of revolutionary movements after Napoleon's defeat. The concert involved regular meetings and diplomatic efforts in order to address issues like territorial disputes and the threat of revolution, aiming to preserve conservative order and stability. However, by the mid-19th century, the system began to break down as nationalistic and liberal movements gained more strength, which led to conflicts like the revolutions of 1848. So, reactions and revolutions. The revolutions of 1848 were a series of widespread uprisings across Europe, driven by demands for liberal reforms, national independence, and social justice. These revolutions began in France and quickly spread to countries like Austria, Germany, Italy, and Hungary. In a lot of cases, protesters sought more political freedom, national unification, and better economic conditions. And although these first successes were seen in some regions, most of the revolutions were crushed by conservative forces. The reactions of European rulers were varied. Some offered concessions but later reasserted control, and while others, like the Austrian and Prussian monarchies, used military force to suppress the uprisings. Despite the failure of the revolutions, they contributed to the eventual rise of nationalism, liberalism, and socialism in Europe.
We're now going to explore the ideologies that emerged in response to the changes brought by the Industrial Revolution. From liberalism to anarchism, these ideologies shaped both political systems and also social structures and reform movements in Europe during our period. The Industrial Revolution led to a significant expansion of the middle class. As industry grew, new jobs and business opportunities emerged, especially in urban centers. This middle class, composed of professionals, merchants, and skilled workers, became a powerful force for change. They demanded a greater voice in politics and reforms that reflected their growing economic and social influences. One of the key ideologies that gained ground during this period was liberalism. Liberalism was about individual freedoms and limiting the power of the state. It promoted popular sovereignty, the idea that power comes from people, alongside the protection of individual rights and liberties. It also encouraged enlightened self-interest and called for active participation in government by all citizens, especially the middle class. Republicanism, while similar to liberalism in some aspects, emphasized structured political systems. It supported popular elections, particularly with universal male suffrage, meaning all men could vote regardless of wealth or social status. Republicanism also stressed the need for checks and balances within government and aimed to level struggles between the traditional aristocracy and the rest of society. Socialism offered a more radical critique of industrial society, with socialists believing that the wealth created by industrialization was not being fairly distributed. They argued for the redistribution of resources to reduce economic inequality and ensure that everyone had access to the basic necessities of life. Finally, anarchism challenged the existence of formal government. Anarchists believed that governmental authority was not unnecessary and harmful. They envisioned a society based on voluntary cooperation, mutual aid, and self-organization of communities. Though often controversial, anarchism raised important questions about power, control, and human freedom. Moving on to 19th century social reform, societal reform was used to fight the negative results of industrialization. Political parties attempted to appeal to people to win political victories, and the democratization of political systems became more and more common around Europe. In addition, labor unions were formed to demand better working conditions. One example is the Associated Shipwright Society that we can see depicted in the image above. Now, as industrialization accelerated, it brought progress but also problems. Cities became overcrowded and many people lived in unsafe, unsanitary conditions. Public health declined, unemployment was widespread, crime rates increased, and access to education and clean water was limited. Factory owners focused on maximizing profits, often exploiting workers through long hours, low pay, and unsafe working environments. These harsh realities led to growing calls for change, especially from liberals who supported interventionist policies. In response, governments began to take action. They introduced regulations on businesses aimed at improving working conditions and curbing abuses. At the same time, major investments were made in infrastructure, modernizing cities with better transportation, sanitation systems, and public works to improve urban life. Private charity organizations also stepped in, trying to address issues like poverty, homelessness, and lack of healthcare, but long-term solutions came from education reform. In many countries, education was made both free and compulsory, reflecting a growing belief that all children deserved opportunity. The Second Industrial Revolution brought with it a wave of new technologies and industries. These advances created jobs that required more specialized skills, shifting the workforce towards more skilled labor. To finish off Unit 6, we'll talk about causation in the age of industrialization. The Industrial Revolution spread from Great Britain to the rest of Europe. It brought several great and revolutionary technological advancements, shaping everyday life and creating the framework for life as we know it today. The Industrial Revolution promoted the development of new classes, and complications resulting from it triggered ideological, governmental, and collective responses. New economic theories arose, and the rise of capitalism was made prominent during this period. We'll now look at the topics that make up Unit 7.
7.1 19th Century Perspectives and Political Developments Overview. During the 19th century, nationalism and imperialism were prominent in Europe, causing instability and resulting in further revolutions and wars. Realism and materialism gained attraction as Romanticism slightly declined in influence, resulting from the mid-19th century wars. The disbandment of the Concert of Europe left a void which was quickly filled by a unified Italy and Germany. As a result, tensions rose among other nations out of concern that the partnership between Italy and Germany would cause them to become too powerful. Thus, opposing countries were inclined to form their own alliances. As tensions in Europe rose, as did the quality of their technology, which further fueled their imperialistic goals. The introduction of the idea of objectivity and subjectivity influenced European ideas and culture by creating a divide on what is the correct way to perceive the world. 7.2 Nationalism. Nationalism is a form of governance which emerged in the late 18th to 19th centuries. It is defined as being one's sense of devotion, pride, and loyalty to their nation, resulting in a sense of unity. However, in some cases, nationalism also invoked a feeling of racial superiority. As nationalism began to rise, so did anti-Semitism. While some countries, such as Britain and France, would grant Jews the ability to participate in all facets of life, other countries, such as Germany, consider Jews to be parasites infecting the cultures of other countries. As a response to the anti-Semitism, Zionism emerged as a nationalistic Jewish movement to return to Palestine in order to create a form of protection against anti-Semitism. However, the movement was unsuccessful. Also, during this time period, Napoleon III of France utilized military force in order to change the constitution and gain more power over France, since at the time he was only a constitutional monarch. With his power and resources, he was able to modernize France. In 1848, the Hungarians attempted to create their own nation separate from Austria. The movement failed. In order to maintain unity within the empire, Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria, created a dual monarchy in 1867, becoming King of Hungary. Hungarians were also given more political power, such as being able to create their own constitution, as well as having a say in lawmaking. 7.3 National Unification and Diplomatic Tensions. The Crimean War pitted major European powers against one another and led to the breakdown of the Concert of Europe. That breakdown created a situation that allowed for a unification effort in the Italian peninsula. The spirit of nationalism led to the unification of Italy through the efforts of Cavour and Garibaldi. Otto von Bismarck was the Prime Minister of Germany and was the mastermind of German unification. He used Realpolitik, which utilizes realist methods to achieve one's goals, in his foreign policy to achieve the goal of unification under a Prussian king. Bismarck used the strength of the Prussian army in order to keep Germany unified, believing that the German states would respect the strength of the army. One of Bismarck's first acts was to govern without parliament. Bismarck created a three-phase plan to further unify Germany. In 1864, he isolated Denmark by forming an alliance with Austria in order to have two German-speaking countries in Danish territories. In 1866, he later isolated Austria via successfully winning the Austro-Prussian War, contributing to the unification of many German states. In 1870, he isolated France by winning the Franco-Prussian War and gaining some territory from France. Lastly, in 1871, the German Empire was created in the Palace of Versailles, where Prussian King Wilhelm was made Kaiser, meaning Emperor of Germany. Understanding that the balance of power in Europe was being disrupted, Bismarck developed the Three Emperors League. The Three Emperors League consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. One of the main reasons Bismarck created this alliance was to ensure that France will not retaliate for their loss in the Franco-Prussian War. However, conflict between the Three Emperors League occurred later, contributing to World War I. The Balkans also later became a battleground for Austria-Hungary and Germany due to the Ottoman Empire's weakened state.
7.4 Darwinism and Social Darwinism. Darwin's theory of evolution challenged long-held scientific and religious beliefs of a man's special place in the world. His theory was widely ridiculed by many people and many religious institutions. Social Darwinism used Darwin's theories to explain differences in human societal development. It was also used to feed into racial ideologies of European superiority and provided a justification for imperialism. 7.5 The Age of Progress and Modernity. The late 19th and early centuries witnessed an increased faith in science and reason to explain the universe. Key advances in science, philosophy, and psychology began to emphasize the role of irrational processes in nature. These advances undermined faith in the predictability of Newtonian science and the primacy of human reason. 7.6 Motivations and methods for new imperialism. Some motivations for new imperialism would be some economic motivation, which would be the need of raw materials, new markets, and investment opportunities. Political and strategic motivations, so national rivalry and competition for power. Cultural and religious motivations, so missionary activity to spread Christianity and cultural belief in European superiority. And then technological advancements, which would be improved weaponry and transportation and easier control over distant territories. So some methods for new imperialism would be colonial conquest, where they would use military force, treaties, and diplomacy to gain control and direct colonization, or indirect rule through local leaders. They used economic exploitations, where they would establish plantations and mines for resource extractions and focus on cash crops and economic dependency. They also did cultural assimilation, so they introduced European education, legal systems, and governments to suppress indigenous cultures and traditions. And then they would also resist and repress. So this would mean local uprisings and revolts against colonial rule, along with violent European repression of resistant movements.
Okay, so this is 7.7 Imperialism's Global Effects. So resources were exploited from colonized land to support the industries in Europe. So European countries were like vampires to the colonies and were just sucking out all of the resources and putting in their own features and influence inside of the colonies. In turn, the colonies became way too dependent on European trade and overall started weakening their own economies. But that wasn't the only bad thing that came out of that. Alright, so now let's look at 7.8, 19th century culture and arts. So during this time, most people lived through factory jobs. They had a ruthless lifestyle because of the Renaissance and the ideals that emerged out of that. But Romanticism heavily opposed that, with nature being the main outlook, and people's emotions were being more highlighted than conserved inside. So Romanticism heavily favored the public, especially the working class. Composers picked up on this. They took Romanticism, especially Beethoven and Chopin, both of them. They incorporated it into their pieces and separated from the Baroque pieces that came out of the Renaissance. You also got literature such as the Frankenstein that came out, focusing more on the natural world and looking towards the future. You also had realism that focused more on the ordinary lifestyles of people and the ordinary things that they do. Also, modernism emerged, which was more abstract and, well, it made art more abstract and experimental. And following that, you got Impressionism, making paintings more focused on light and color and how that influences the moment. You also had Post-Impressionists like Vincent van Gogh, making more emotion and structure, such as Starry Night, from from Impressionism. And you also got Expressionism, where the artist used intense colors and distorted forms to express their inner feelings. Fauvism, being more wild and vibrant, using unnatural colors, being more bold. And finally, you had Cubism, popularized by Pablo Picasso, showcasing objects being more geometric, that he ignored reality and wanted to go do his own thing. So he started painting in cubes. Hence the name Cubism. Okay, so finally, 7.9, causation in 19th century perspectives and political developments. So first we have nationalism, and people viewed nationalism, well, didn't even view, it was just a straight up cause for most of the things that occurred, with people being more strongly tied to their country and ethnic group. So you were able to unite a bunch of split states together, like Germany, into one giant country, like how Bismarck did it. Also, you had social Darwinism, which started to influence how people started to view society, which just further increased nationalism, being able to like segregate out a group and oppress them, and unite together like a group of people that are against that ethnic group. Also, you had technology that was just transforming this time period, such as railroads, telegraphs, factories becoming more advanced. Also, to add on to this, you also had liberal and conservative views, with liberals supporting ideas like free trade, individual rights, but conservatives we just wanted to maintain monarchies and social hierarchies as compared to the liberals. So you ended up having a lot of ideology like fights, such as the one that is showed inside the Revolution of 1848. And also you had military strength being a major role too inside what occurred inside the 19th century, with imperialism wanting to make countries expand. That just created way more tension between the countries inside of Europe. And finally, you have capitalism and industrialization being viewed as the roots of revolution, mainly because of Karl Marx's ideology for a classless society. But he just mainly made capitalism and industrialization look as the root of revolutions and political movements and socialism.
So that's the end of the review. Thanks for listening, and these are the resources that we use to gather our information.